That day the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. So are we, is this language just figurative? Are we just using this to talk about, as some people presume, Satan? How do you interpret it? Is this literal? Is there some creature out there, Leviathan? Or is the fact that he's called the fleeing serpent and the twisting serpent, is that making a reference back to the Garden of Eden? Hey everybody, it's Tim with Uniform Members for Christ, and welcome back. We are back again this week with session 4 of our Genesis walkthrough. If you haven't caught the first 3 sessions, that's okay. We will do a slight recap and hopefully get you back up to speed. Okay, so first we're going to start by reading a few passages. We'll actually start with verse 14, which we covered last week. But that's just by way of recap, and then we'll touch on the rest of the passages for this session. Okay, and God said in verse 14, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth, and it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars." Okay, so verse 17, "And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on earth." Verse 18, "To rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good." Okay. I would like to clarify something that I said in our previous video. On day 1 in verse 3, we are of the impression that that was when God created light itself. Okay, whatever that is made up of, for instance, photons, and whatever exactly light is, that is what we believe in day 1, that God spoke into existence. Okay, so there's obviously various wavelengths of light, and there's all kinds of things that are way beyond my understanding when it comes to light itself. But what we see in verse 14 is a massive heat source, obviously the sun, right, that emits light. And then it reflects off the moon, and we have it at night, right? It's probably not, it's a very simple comparison, but we could probably compare the sun to a giant light bulb, right? A light bulb isn't light itself, and the sun isn't light itself. The light was created on day 1, and a light source was created on day 4. That probably clarifies that. Okay. As we go through this, I'm not ignoring the potential metaphors or figures of speech connected with the greater and the lesser light motifs, but we've already touched on a lot of that in our session 1 when we talked about John 1 and how Jesus is the light, and then he's obviously looking back and kind of making a comparison between that and what we see in Genesis chapter 1 verse 3. So if you have not watched that, I think you benefit from that video. I would like to say, though, there are several New Testament authors who use the greater and lesser light concept to express spiritual principles besides John. For example, the Apostle Paul, he wrote this in 1 Corinthians 15:40 through 41. And it says, "There are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is of one kind, and the glory of the earthly is of another kind. There is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for stars differ from glory to glory." It's very interesting that he knew that. I'm not aware of any telescopes they would have had during the days of the Apostle Paul. At least nothing like we have today. I mean, how did they know? I mean, I guess just looking up in the sky, we can see that some stars are bigger than other stars. At least we perceive it to be that way. But perhaps that's its just location in the sky, in the space. But it's very interesting that Paul seems to know here something about the glory of the stars. How they differ from each other. It's interesting. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention Revelation 21:23, because a lot of you probably will be thinking about this, so we'll touch on it. In the New Jerusalem, which is what the Apostle John is seeing in his vision in Revelation 21, he notes a few interesting facts that we'll touch on. First of all, there's no temple, which makes complete sense when we think about the purpose of the temple. The second thing I'd like to point out is the city has no need of the sun or the moon to shine upon it because the glory of God gives it light. You can compare that idea with Exodus 34:29 and 2 Corinthians 3:7. In Exodus 34:29, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the two tablets of the testimony in his hands, as he came down from the mountain, he did not know that the skin of his face was shining because he had been talking to God. And, that fits perfectly with the whole thing in the Bible. God is light. More than just truth and no darkness in him, but literally he emits light. It seems like that light comes from him in some form, enough that when you're in his presence, your face shines. And what's interesting is that is in a literal sense as it happened to Moses. And it seems to be in a literal sense what will happen in New Jerusalem as the glory of God will light the city. But, this happens in our meetings as well. Have you ever been in a meeting where God's presence was so real and powerful, and you're just sitting there in awe of him, and you just look at people and their face is just glowing? It happens at salvation, right? As they've just had an encounter with Jesus, and he has just washed their sins away, and they're just glowing. I mean, that is one way that our face glows. It's not literal, although perhaps if you could see into the spirit realm at that moment, you would see somebody's face glowing, but it is a literal expression of what they're feeling because of what God has just done in their life. And let me stop here. If you've never experienced that, there is more than us just sitting down in a building on a Sunday for an hour and listening to somebody talk for 45 minutes. There is so much more to God than that. And if you have not experienced his presence tangibly in a really real way, not some kind of weird, all this weird, no, I mean, just like intimately encounter your creator, that is something that's available to you. We just humble ourselves and acknowledge that God wants more to do with our lives than only a brief Sunday morning encounter. And you can reference 2 Corinthians 3:7 on your own when you have time. Okay, another point that John's making in Revelation 21 is that by the light of New Jerusalem, which is the glory of God, the nations will walk. Now, I tend to think of this as figurative language, speaking of nations walking in the truth. As Christ leads them in righteousness from New Jerusalem, they're walking under his commands and precepts. And I get that because of something we find in John 8:12. And it says, again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. There will be complete safety and no nighttime in the New Jerusalem. And does that mean that there will still be nighttime on other parts of the earth, on the other nations? I'm not sure, but it says that in New Jerusalem, there will not be any nighttime, which is interesting. And this last point that I want to make is so astonishing. It's just amazing. Only those whose names are recorded in the heavenly registry, which is known as the Lamb's Book of Life, will be permitted to enter the gates of New Jerusalem. So that city is reserved specifically for those whose names have been recorded in the Book of Life. And we can't get into the Lamb's Book of Life. We can't get into what period of time we're talking about here and why there's some that are on the earth whose names are not recorded. We can't get into all that, but there are good reasons and explanations for that. Okay. Verse 19, continuing in Genesis chapter 1. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures. Hang on to that because we're going to touch on that. And every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to his kind. And God saw that it was good. Well, we might as well stop here and get a little weird, because what fun would it be if we didn't explore some strange things that we can find in the Bible from time to time. This idea here of God created great sea creatures. It stood out to me, and I decided to look up the Hebrew word in Blue Letter Bible. And in Strong's Concordance, he has it as H8577, in case you want to look it up. And it's actually tenin. Tenin is the word. It's a fun word to say. But it means, the King James Version translates that word into English as dragon 21 times, serpent 3 times, and whale 3 times. Okay. Then the outline of biblical usage for the word tanin in the Old Testament is dragon, serpent, or sea monster, dragon or dinosaur, sea or river monster, serpent or venomous snake. All right, we find the word again in Exodus 29:3, and it says this. He says, "Speak and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lies in the midst of the streams, that says, My Nile is my own, and I made it myself." Okay, obviously in this instance, great dragon is being used metaphorically, right, to express characteristics of Pharaoh. All right, I will point out though, in order to be used and to have any kind of meaning, when you use a word metaphorically, there needs to be some type of understanding of the nature of that creature and why you're comparing somebody to that creature. Okay, for instance, in this example, we're very likely dealing with the Nile crocodile. Okay, so I believe Pharaoh is being compared to the Nile crocodile, and here are a few ways that that would work metaphorically. In the Nile, the croc was the apex predator. It didn't have anything to fear, and it pretty much could just feed and hide in the marshes and in the waters and the reeds, and it was its stomping ground, if you will. It would have felt very secure in there, and it would have relied upon the depths of the Nile, not only for food, as I mentioned, but also for a place to go down and ambush various things. All right, so like Egypt, the croc depended entirely upon the Nile for a place to hunt and thrive, and the passage says, "I will pull you up out of your streams from the place of your safety where you arrogantly assume no one can conquer you." And that is really what's going on here. You know, Pharaoh is feeling very confident. He has the Nile. It's watering the land of Egypt. Just like that crocodile, he feels very secure in his land, like he's the king of his castle, right? And there's nothing that can harm him. From the interpretations that I read in various commentators, this seems to imply that he was very arrogantly prideful and assuming that he couldn't be touched, and God was basically going to humble him. Okay, I can't get away from this concept of these great sea creatures without mentioning something found in Isaiah 27:1, because it's just so intriguing. Okay, that day the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. So are we, is this language just figurative? Are we just using this to talk about, as some people presume, Satan? How do you interpret it? Is this literal? Is there some creature out there, Leviathan? Or is the fact that he's called the fleeing serpent and the twisting serpent, is that making a reference back to the Garden of Eden in chapter 3? Some people, assume that as well. I really don't know, and I haven't studied it in depth enough to comment on it much past that, but I just thought you might find it interesting where we find these words, these great sea creatures, these tanins, and I think generally speaking they probably are just certain types of great animals that we find in the sea, but this reference to Leviathan is pretty interesting. I think that scholars have wrestled over this for a long time, and I doubt we're gonna figure out the answer today in this video, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention so that you will know there's some fun little things in the Bible that you can encounter and track down from time to time. Now, there are a few other places where Leviathan is mentioned, and I think we should point those out quickly. So when in Psalm 104:26 it says, "There go the ships and Leviathan, whom you formed to play in it," and he's talking about, if you read the preceding verse, he's talking about in the seas. So it says you formed Leviathan to play in the seas, and Leviathan is mentioned several other places as well. This is not an all-inclusive list, I don't believe, but it's Job 3:8. And then Job 41 verses 1 through 34 seem to talk about him some. Psalm 74 verses 13 through 14. And then Psalms 104 verse 25 through 28. And then Isaiah 27:1. So it gives you some places that you can go and see. Again, is this just, is this a real sea creature of some sort? Is this symbolically dealing with Satan, or as some have suggested, is Leviathan a figurative speech for some symbol of evil or something like that God conquers and overcomes? I don't know. I'll leave it to you to decide, but I think it's intriguing. Okay, verse 21. So God created the great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird, according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. Verse 22. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And then verse 23 says, And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. Okay, so that was fun. I'm glad you joined me this week. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments below, or you can find us via email at uniformmembersforchrist@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Uniform Members for Christ. Those are the easiest places to message us. You can hit us on our webpage there, ask questions or comments, ask for prayer, any various other things that you need. We will come back next week, Lord willing, with session 5, where we're wrapping up chapter 1 and getting into chapter 2, which is a lot of fun. Next week, we're talking about God created man and woman. There's a lot to be talked about there. If you got any comments on who you think Leviathan is or what you think Leviathan is, drop it in the comments. I'd love to read those. It'd be a lot of fun. If you have any references, are there any New Testament references that I've missed to Leviathan that could connect him to something other than a literal sea creature? I'm not sure. Perhaps there are. Okay, well, if you don't know, I did write a book. It's A Picture of the Heart, The White Oak, and it is available on Amazon in paperback and for Kindle. Or you can go to my website, timantoncopeland.com, and you can actually find it under my bookstore for various other digital formats. Okay, well, thanks for joining me today. I pray the Lord will bless you and enrich your knowledge of Himself as you study His Word, hopefully through videos like this and other teachers that can benefit you. All right, guys, take care.